Creation of Spider-Man. Did you know that Spider-Man, one of Marvel's greatest creations, was originally deemed to be a failure and terrible idea by Stan Lee's publisher? Since its first inception in the final issue of Marvel Comics' Amazing Fantasy, a canceled anthology comic book series, Spider-Man has grown into a fan favorite among many fans. The friendly neighborhood web-slinger's personality and backstory won the hearts of many, but he was not always a popular icon as he is today. Following the success of Fantastic Four in 1962, Marvel Comics editor and head writer Stan Lee was casting for a new superhero idea. He had already created heroes that was very strong, able to turn invisible, and possess flight skills, Fantastic Four. As he was creating for a unique superpower for his new creation, an idea struck him when he saw a fly crawling on the wall. He thought to himself that it would be cool if a person possesses such power to stick on a wall like an insect. In his autobiography, however, he himself was unsure whether the story was actually true after retelling the story several times. Several ideas came to mind while coming up with the names, such as Mosquito Man and Insect Man. The first name was not glamorous, but with the latter being worse. After some brainstorming, he came up with the name Spider-Man. The name was both mysterious and dramatic. Stan Lee also wanted the character to be a teenager, as his other heroes at the time were grown-ups and the teenagers were only sidekicks. Having a teenager would have been unique. The name Spider-Man was also chosen instead of Spider-Boy, as Lee wanted the character to age throughout the comics. He also did not want Spider-Man to be inferior compared to the other adult characters. Lee claimed that before Marvel started, any superhero might be walking down the street and see a 12-foot-tall monster coming toward him with purple skin and 8 arms, breathing fire, and the character would have said something like, "Oh, there's a monster from another world. I better catch him before he destroys this city." Now, if one of our Marvel characters saw the same monster, I'd like to think Spider-Man would say, "Who's the nut in the Halloween getup? I wonder what he's advertising." Spider-Man also has a hyphen and a capital M, which is commonly neglected by most according to Lee. The idea behind the way it was made to make his hero look very different from Superman. Lee added that the Spider-Man character was made to look like an average guy who was relatable to the readers, such as having various problems in life like allergy attack, money issues, dandruff, acne, and ingrown toenails. Lee also stated that he was able to resonate with the Spider-Man character as he himself had a fair share of his own issues like Spider-Man. Design and publication of Spider-Man. Stan Lee's friend and longtime collaborator Jack Kirby, a legendary comic artist, was first approached by Lee to design Spider-Man. Kirby was, however, more suited towards drawing more heroic Marvel figures such as Captain America, and Lee wanted Spider-Man to be more of an ordinary average guy. Following several unsuccessful sketches, Lee approached another artist, Steve Ditko, to design Spider-Man. Ditko's design was used moving forward with the classic red and blue spandex with a spider logo on the chest. He gave Spider-Man his iconic full-face mask with large white eyes and intricate webbing patterns all over his costume. The web gun was replaced with web shooters, and wing-like webs under the arms were added. Lee also added that readers of Spider-Man were able to imagine that they were under the costume in an interview in 2015. Stan Lee, who was working for Timely Comics, which would then evolve to Marvel Comics, presented the idea of his character Spider-Man to his publisher, Martin Goodman. However, Goodman disagreed with the idea. He stated that people hated spiders and nobody would buy a book called Spider-Man. Furthermore, a teenager cannot be the main character and could only be a sidekick. Goodman further added. However, Goodman finally agreed to a Spider-Man tryout after arguments by Stan Lee. The science fiction magazine Amazing Fantasy was about to be canceled, and Goodman agreed to slot Spider-Man in its final issue. Little did they realize that Spider-Man sales was the highest-selling comics at the time. The 12-cent Amazing Fantasy in which Spider-Man first appeared now rakes in as much as $20,500 US. Lee was then asked to write an entire run featuring the friendly neighborhood web slinger, which was then entitled The Amazing Spider-Man. First appearance, 1962. The story that began everything. Peter Parker, a normal teenager living in Forest Hills, Queens, with his Uncle Ben and Aunt May Parker. He is a gifted science student and attends a local high school called Midtown High. Despite being brave to ask girls out on dates, he is constantly rejected as he is viewed as a nerd by most of them. One evening, while attending a demonstration on radiation at General Technologies Laboratories East, he failed to notice a spider dropping through a radiation ray. The spider would then bite Parker and died. Feeling sickish, Parker left the demonstration only to be nearly run over by a car. He swiftly avoided the car and made a superhuman leap into the air. Parker then realized that he has gained superpowers in terms of super speed, strength, and agility of a spider. He is also able to cling to surfaces of a wall or building, hence the term web crawler. Mr. Fantastic would later attribute this power to his biomagnetism, which is an enhanced version of spiders being able to cling to surfaces using their tiny claws and electrostatic force. With the new possibilities of the new powers, Parker saw a wrestling ring and signed $100 to the man who can stay in the ring for 3 minutes with Crusher Hogan. Returning home and donning a hood with the nickname The Masked Marvel, Parker made light work of Hogan and easily lifted him over his head and carrying him up to the post. Impressed by his skills, a TV agent named Max Schiffman, who was at the wrestling event, approached Parker and convinced him to perform on late-night TV. He suggested Parker to keep the mask as a secret identity is great showmanship. Returning home, Parker made himself a spider-themed costume, a supply of sticky web fluid, and 2 jets for shooting the fluid while exclaiming, "Here comes the Spider-Man!" Parker became a celebrity with appearances on television impressing studio audiences with his new skill set. Several minutes after his television debut as the Amazing Spider-Man, Parker saw a thief running past him and tried to escape the building. When the security guard complained, Parker with newfound arrogance said, "That's your job. I'm through being pushed around. By anyone." Some days later, Parker returned home to find police at his residence. The police informed him that his Uncle Ben surprised a burglar who then shot and killed him. The burglar managed to escape, but the police was able to corner him at the old Acme warehouse at the waterfront. Parker saw the face of the burglar after knocking him out and realized to his horror that it was the same thief from the studio which he let escape. If he had not allowed the thief to escape, he might have been able to prevent the burglary from taking place, resulting in his uncle's death. Guilt-struck, Peter Parker realizes that, with great power, there must also come great responsibility. Parker decided to pursue the road of being a hero and left his TV career behind. Adopting the mantle of friendly neighborhood Spider-Man, Peter Parker eventually developed true altruism and responsibility of a hero. The Amazing Spider-Man #1, March 1963. Story: Spider-Man, Freak, Public Menace. Heroes and villains introduced: Jonah Jameson, John Jameson. Several months after Spider-Man's introduction, a solo ongoing series was followed, beginning with The Amazing Spider-Man #1 published on December 10th, 1962, cover date March 1963, which would eventually be Marvel's top-selling series. It was also ranked at number 23 of the 100 greatest Marvel comics of all time. The main feature story of the first issue was Spider-Man, Freak, Public Menace. It also famously marked the first introduction of the Daily Bugle newspaper alongside J. Jonah Jameson and his son John Jameson. Relieving the previous day's events of the death of his uncle, there were several other issues troubling Peter, such as his financial problems. Wanting to ease the financial troubles of Aunt May, Peter thought of several ideas to make money. He thought of robbing banks with his powers, but realized how terrible it was. Aunt May encouraged Peter to study well to become a scientist. He proceeded to call his TV agent for more entertainment bookings as Spider-Man, but realized that since he was unable to expose his secret identity, he was unable to cash in the checks he made for his entertainment gigs. The Daily Bugle editor J. Jonah Jameson loathes Spider-Man and described him as a costume vigilante and a public menace. With most public opinions turning against Spider-Man after Jonah's doings, Parker was unable to proceed with his entertainment gigs. Coming up empty, he saw his Aunt May pawning her jewelry to make ends meet. Feeling frustrated and angry, Peter turns his hateful crusade to Jonah Jameson. The following day, Peter joins his classmates to witness the launching of a rocket piloted by Jonah's son, John Jameson. one of the capsules experienced a breakdown in its guidance unit, spinning off out of control. Realizing that nobody could do anything, Spider-Man donned his costume and offered his services to rescue planners. Peter was able to help John in taking manual control of the capsule and parachuting to safety, eventually saving the day. However, the next day, the newspaper headline shouted, "Spider-Man Menace," and the events that occurred the previous day was condemned by Jonah, much to Peter's dismay. Story: The Chameleon Strikes. Heroes and villains introduced, Fantastic Four, Professor Newton, the Chameleon. This story highlights on how Peter Parker attempted to join the Fantastic Four under the impression of making some money. Unable to access their private facilities, Spider-Man thought that the Fantastic Four would be impressed with his breaking-in skills and bypassing the stealthy alarms. After successfully breaking in, he came face to face with the Bronze of Fantastic Four, the Thing. With more combat with the rest of the Fantastic Four, Mr. Fantastic finally put the fight to a halt and demanded to know Spider-Man's true intentions. When he told them that he just wanted a paying job, they laughed him off and explained that they do not work for cash. The villain Chameleon was also introduced in this story. The Chameleon is ranked as Spider-Man's 14th greatest enemy. Usually depicted as Master of Disguises, the Chameleon is known for his ability to impersonate virtually anybody, and is also the half-brother of Kraven the Hunter. In this story, the Chameleon impersonated as Spider-Man stole the missile defense plans, ultimately framing Spider-Man. Knowing Spider-Man was in need of money, this was the perfect setup plan. Knowing that he was being framed, he webbed the police and tracked the Chameleon down. Before the Chameleon was able to hand over the secret plans to the Russians, Spider-Man apprehended him and took him back to the police. The Chameleon was able to outsmart Spider-Man and escaped on foot. This story also highlighted the first time Parker used his Spidey sense to track the Chameleon. The Amazing Spider-Man number 2, May 1963. Story: Duel to the Death with the Vulture. Heroes, villains introduced, the Vulture, Liz Allen, Flash Thompson. One of the main villains of Sinister Six, the Vulture, was introduced in this series. Parker's bullies and his first crush, Flash Thompson and Liz Allen, also made their first appearance in the series. The Vulture, who is a master thief, was on his way to the next crime job, and Jonah Jameson wanted pictures for his bulletin. Peter thought of this as a brilliant idea to use his abilities as Spider-Man to snap pictures of the Vulture by using an old camera that Uncle Ben once used. After Spider-Man successfully tracked the Vulture, he pursued the Vulture but was knocked out inside a water tower. Using his own sheer strength, Parker successfully climbed out of the water tower as his web-fluid chambers were empty. Selling the pictures, he did prove to be a success to Jonah, and he decided to improve his costume by adding extra capsules of web fluid. Jonah was impressed with Peter's pictures, and informed that Peter would have more employment opportunities if he could bring more quality pictures of Spider-Man. Later, Peter encountered Flash and his gang, who were headed to the Duel transfer to see if the Vulture would turn up. The Vulture and Spider-Man clashed as the Vulture stole a case of diamonds from the delivery man. Using his anti-Vulture gadget, Spider-Man successfully disabled the Vulture's flying mechanic mechanism and eventually busting him and surrendering him to the police. Story: The Uncanny Threat of the Terrible Tinkerer. Heroes, villains introduced, the Tinkerer, aliens, Professor Cobwell. Having the opportunity to work on science experiments with the famous Professor Cobwell, Peter's first task was to pick up a small radio that the professor had repaired. While getting the radio as requested, Peter's spider sense tingled crazy. After the radio repair, Peter checked the back panel of the radio and saw technology that was unrecognizable. On his hunch, he decided to investigate further on the Tinkerer's business. He found out that the Tinkerer and his alien comrades were installing spyware in the radios of important scientists to understand their strengths and weaknesses. Deciding to stop their plans, Spider-Man attacked the aliens and the Tinkerer. The Tinkerer and Spider-Man fought, and eventually a fire broke out. As the smoke becomes thicker, Spider-Man lost hold of the Tinkerer in the fight, and a fire was assumed to be started by Spider-Man. The aliens eventually left Earth, vowing to be on guard against Earthlings like Spider-Man. Before Peter left, he found a mask in the form of the Tinkerer's face and wondered what truly happened at the lair of their fight. The Amazing Spider-Man number 3, July 1963. Story: the strangest foe of them all, Dr. Octopus. Heroes and villains introduced: Dr. Octopus. The main leader of Sinister Six was introduced here while he was working with his mechanical robotic arms to perform highly radioactive experiments from behind the lead shield walls. An explosion in the lab caused Dr. Otto Octavius to be caught in the blast. His robotic arms were fused with the body and were able to perform mental commands as though they were on their own. Being deranged, he kidnapped the hospital authorities and held them hostages. Deployed by Jonah Jameson to get an insider scoop on the kidnapping, Peter Parker changed to Spider-Man and tried to rescue the hostages. Being pinned down by Otto's mechanical claws, Spidey left the defenseless as Dr. Octopus barricaded the area to prevent outsiders and tossed him out of the window. Feeling encouraged after listening to Johnny Storm on not giving up easily, this sparked a resolve in Peter to fight back against Dr. Octopus, propelling him to the top of the plant's rooftop. Peter managed to get into close combat quarters with Dr. Octopus and landed a solid hook to his chin, knocking him out, eventually surrendering him to the police for custody.